Talk about the market effects of the grain corridor and the U.S. corn exports. Right here on Connected Farmer, your channel to keep you up to date to the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. So, Jerry, we are finishing another week with very good rally for soybeans and also not that good, but a continued rally for corn. So, let's start by the oil seed. What do you think has happened to push that rally?
Well, I think the markets in soybeans at this point, they're not as directly tied into the food corridor scenario and that, but in general here, there's still lots of optimism about the whole world scenario here on biodiesel. There's no some commentaries about that this week, and there seems to be some positive things going on in the export markets. But right now, the going back to the food corridor scenario that's really been dominating the news here for the last 10 days or so, or 2 weeks. Of course, it's highly important that to the world here at this point that particular arrangement of being able to ship grains out of Ukraine across to Turkey and then out into the Mediterranean and Africa and other places is highly important. Late last week, there seemed to be some building optimism about the Russians and the Ukraine and also the UN getting together here. But then we had a very unusual situation where there was while the Russians are being nice at the bargaining table, they haven't been so nice about sending missiles into Ukraine here in the major cities, and basically look like they're targeting the energy situations, the electricity, things of that nature. And it turns up that there happened to be a missile that actually went across the border to Poland, and that definitely sparked things and got things going on Tuesday and that. But after closer observations in that and what's gone on, it seems it was a Russian missile, but it was one of them the Ukrainians had for as for a defensive posture, in that ended up falling back into Poland instead of going back and hitting anything in the incoming missiles. So that really kind of countered the early week enthusiasm as we move towards the later things in the week here. By yesterday and today, it looks like that they've got a 4-month situation agreed upon at this point. The U.S. has decided to take some of the restrictions off of one of the Russian agricultural banks, and that has handled some of these shipments and supposedly opened up their electronic payments system that's called SWIFT, and that's definitely a gesture from the U.S. and Europe on that one. There's still a lot of issues still out floating around out there concerning fertilizer and things of that nature, and also how many boats and how many shipping companies will decide this still is a place they want to put their ships in and things like that. Uh, that's still up in the air, but there is some attitude here, at least, that there's going to be a little free flowing activity in some of the Russian ports, as there has been in the Ukrainian Odessa and other places there over the last 3 or 4 months. That's really kind of pushed things along here. I think the one thing the Ukrainians are also pointing to that they're going to be a little more making shipments going to some of their to Africa and the Mid East and things like that on a more humanitarian situation. So that definitely was another feature the Russians were pointing to as a something that wasn't really was supposed to be more of that going on than there has been over the last couple months. But in general, that's been up and down as the week has gone on. But like you say, corn has hung in there a little bit, so along with the beans in the short term.
Yes, and for still in the oil seed side of things, one of the major factors are the worsening conditions in Argentina's weather.
Oh, definitely. That's a factor in there. They're down earlier this week. They're reporting less than 20, excuse me, 25% of their soybeans, and they really hadn't planted. They did have some rains around, but they hadn't really got enough to feel good. There is some more rains potentially coming in late weekend, early next week. It's not as big of a storm potential as there was earlier here, and that's a feature. And interestingly enough, some of your weather updates here from parts of Brazil are not as rosy about how much rain has really occurred. And the interesting thing, once the rainy season does pick up in Brazil, it usually comes with a pretty good vengeance. And here we are, we're basically uh, 2 months into the planting season, starts around October 1st, and we're about 10% behind on the overall plantings. And most of that's, you'd have to say, is center, west, and north up through Mato Grosso, Goiás, and probably some of the northeast areas. I'm not very good about some of those names up in Baja and Tucumcari and that. But that's some of the issues that we're running into on the beans, and I think that's been a subtle part of this thing. The beans, though, have had a difficult time getting above this 1450 to 1470 area on the January. We suggested some sales up in there earlier, and I continue to suggest that to people in the soybeans because of the fact that the one thing that's still going on here is, though, everybody's pointing at the potential crop size. I'm not sure it's guaranteed, but there's lots of people optimistic La Nina is going to set back and it's going to be hunky dory. But that's another feature in here. And as we go towards the kind of seasonal highs in here, traditionally right around this Thanksgiving to December 1st, there we could easily uh, get some coverage out there and go from there. The interesting thing about it is uh, if the Chinese come back in here and start to be a bigger buyer, which they have yet to, they're usually utilizing the last of last year's crop in Brazil. So we'll see what's going on with them.
Now, jumping into the corn side of things, we had major exports uh, from the United States to countries like Mexico.
Definitely. Yeah, early in the week we had a solid kind of shipment period, but then in the midweek situation, right after this announcement that the missile from that hit Poland was really not a Russian missile by them, firing from them, all of a sudden we had a 1.25 billion, excuse me, 1.25 million metric ton sale of corn to Mexico for old crop and about 600,000 for new crop. And it's interesting. We had this kind of mysterious confrontation in the media last week from the Mexican officials down there that they weren't going to buy any type of excuse me, GMO corn. They were only wanting non-GMO corn and things like that. The interesting twist about it is that they've been buying GMO corn for their livestock operations. Yes, we mentioned it last week, and they're talking about 1.17 million metric tons That's what they've been buying the last few years, maybe a little bit more. Now all of a sudden, I think some of the uh, big feed yards in northern parts of Brazil, or excuse me, Mexico, Mexico, are looking at the window saying, "What's going on here? We don't have enough corn out here to feed these cattle, and that's a huge feature of Mexico's lifestyle is beef. And so all of a sudden, let's maybe they're deciding differently than the people in Mexico City, but that was definitely a feature. Unfortunately, it didn't have a lot of enthusiasm because we had this whole news story coming about less conflict in the Black Sea, and the deal's going to be off. So despite the announcement on Wednesday morning, we had lower prices that day. But then we bounced back a little bit here since then because of our weekly sales in the U.S.
Now, do you think that the market is already weighing in on the possibility that Brazil might export corn to China?
Well, there's a lot of people, including the Chinese, talking about all the deals they are looking to do. And I don't disagree that the Chinese are looking to try to get some more producers out, or excuse me, providers of corn to them. At this point, the four major countries that have been providing corn to China, of course, the U.S. Ukraine was really right up there, a little bit further along than the U.S. was at times. Occasionally, you got some things from Argentina and they weren't doing anything or buying anything from Brazil, primarily because they didn't have their procedures not organized here about the sanitation rules and things of that nature, and to some extent, going back and forth. There's plenty of GMO corn in Brazil, and there's plenty of it in Argentina, but in general here, the Chinese haven't really got into that game of playing that they have to have non-GMO. But that's the real interesting thing. They've been making this talk, and we're going to do this and that. There's not going to be very much corn available because Argentina's in this drought at this point. Their prospects of having a really super corn crop because is limited at this time. Because right now we're looking at probably just in quick figure here, we're talking about 10 million less production on their wheat. So the prospects, it can change. They're not going to plant too much corn until after the beans are planted and the wheat's harvested and things of that nature. But at the same time, they're not going to be in there. And so in reality, the big corn availability for Brazil here is not going to come until next summer from the safrinha crop. And so I'm just not sure that they can decide that they can sit back and wait. They're talking up the idea they're going to buy all this stuff from Brazil. They might do it next summer, but don't forget here we had this very tough conditions here along the Yangtze River here this summer, and that was flooding, things like that. And the corn that's raised in China is up in the northeast, north of Beijing, and so usually what happens is they import corn for those livestock operations in the southern third of the country, and so I got to feel like that issue has been aggravating in my mind is that they all talk about the shipments from Brazil are going to be happening here in January. Yeah, after last year's crop sizes and things like that, I think the southern part of Brazil is going to want that corn for their livestock operations too, and even up into Goiás. And so I don't sense that there's going to be that much corn available for shipments to China.
And what are you expecting for next week?
Well, it's always a choppy one going into the holiday period there on Thursday in the U.S. Thanksgiving's not is not a holiday that's actually celebrated around the world, but what usually happens is it the traders kind of disappear by Tuesday, and then Wednesday and Friday things can get a little choppy, and and that. But I also think that the need for maybe some last minute shipments uh, out of the U.S. could give this market a little bit of spikes. But I'd have to say that, as I mentioned earlier in corn, we'll need to get that rally. Anything in this 465 to 470, all up to 490, and that, interestingly enough, that's going to actually get $7 corn in many areas, which is highly unusual. Our basis levels this fall in the Western Corn Belt have been extremely good, and that for that part of the world. Traditionally, the basis levels in Iowa and Nebraska and that places are, you're talking about 40 to 50 cents under during harvest, and maybe you get up to 30 cents or maybe less than that by this time after harvest. And then you don't get these plus basis levels and very often at all, even in the spring. So that's going to make things quite interesting on the corn. The soybeans, a similar situation there, that 1450, 1470 area is going to be a rough area. The wheat market really has had a tough time over the last 10 days, 2 weeks here. There's not a lot of rain in the U.S. here, and that really is a very tough situation for this winter wheat crop. We have slightly come up on our crop conditions here. We were at 28% a couple weeks ago. We moved up 2% the last 2 weeks, up to 32. But 32% is still at a historically low level for this time of year for wheat. And so it could really turn into a lot of abandoned wheat this winter, but that's not in people's minds. There's always optimism about spring rains making the wheat turned around. But right now, the rain that's potentially going to occur here in Argentina, what we talked about here earlier over the weekend and early next week, getting kind of late. They're actually starting to have harvest down there. I heard there were 10% in Argentina. So I don't know that we're going to have a big boost to Argentina yields on wheat for that. So, but the wheat market really is so tied up in the food corridor mentality right now. I don't know if that's really the case, but that's where the world's at. That's what they consider if we're getting wheat out of Ukraine and Russia, then the world's saved. We don't need any other concerns.
All right. Thank you very much.
It's always good to talk, Luis, and we'll talk after the holiday there. Maybe we'll do it a little earlier than sometimes, but we got plenty of things to talk about, as there always are around the U.S. markets.
Exactly.